Happy Monday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Obviously, today's a day that many of you are just getting back into your daily routine, getting back into the rhythm of things. Some kids starting back school, maybe your first full work week heading back to the office. So, of course, the weather is going to be something that you don't necessarily want to have to worry about too much. And good news is we got our rain chances out of the way this past weekend, so most of the beginning of your work week is looking mighty dry. Speaking of your rainfall totals over this past weekend, take a look at your map. And I had to go out the past 5 days in advance because 48 hours didn't necessarily cover some of those rain chances that came in on Friday night. So you can see that the green and the yellow shaded areas, which are indicating your totals of 1 inch or maybe even 2 inches in nature, that was found in the northernmost counties here in central Georgia. So areas like Jones, Baldwin, portions of Hancock, Washington, Putnam, Jasper, and over to Monroe counties. And then you can see some scattered areas of that green as you go farther down to the south around Macon, close to Warner Robins, over into Twiggs County. But it's kind of a definitive line that crossed over all the way back over into East Alabama, made its way across areas like LaGrange, just south of Peachtree City, and extends all the way over into South Carolina as a matter of fact. But the big consensus is that there were only isolated pockets of seeing maybe some totals upwards to about 1 inch in nature, where you can see some green scattered about areas close to Eastman. We'll go over your specific amounts here just for a second. So you can see some of these areas up here in northern Jones County, stretching into Jasper and portions of eastern Monroe County, close to Juliet. About 2.5 or 3 inches of rain. Consider yourself very lucky because those were the only areas that got up as high with some of those totals. But still within some of this green, you can see some totals pretty close to the 2-inch mark. Most areas hovering around 1 and maybe 0.6 of an inch or 0.8 of an inch just north of Macon here, 1.6 inches down in Roberta, and over just to the west of Jeffersonville and where our radar does sit, about 1.8 inches of rain. Now we go down farther to the south, and rain was a lot more scarce and a lot more isolated in nature, if you will. It wasn't more widely scattered like what you saw up to the north. So your totals, except for a select few spots like areas around Eastman that got about 2 inches of rain, most of those totals were only about 0.3 of an inch or 1/10 of an inch of rain like you saw in Soperton and in Dublin. But some of these darker blue areas are closer to 1 inch. Even some isolated areas down in Chris County got up to around 2.5 inches. But at Middle Georgia Regional Airport, here's how much rain that we did receive. We got about 1/100th of an inch of rain, and that was during the really late hours on Friday night. Most of the rain did fall as we went into the morning hours on Saturday, so the second and the third. And in total, we've recorded about 0.61 inches of rain so far for the month of January. We've updated our averages for this month, so on average, we typically get just over 4 inches of rain for the month of January. Believe it or not, January is actually on record a little bit of a drier month than what we did see for the month of December, where your average total was a little bit higher above the 4-inch mark. But back in 1925, so 101 years ago, we recorded over a foot of rain, 13.22 inches of rain. Still have a ways to go before we reach either of these numbers, but we do have a maybe widespread rainmaker in the glimpse of your 7-day forecast. So we'll go over the latest with that. And we'll talk about last year's rainfall as a whole. So we now have 100% completion on this graphic, where we started out 2025 well below average for January, February, and March, right there close to what we typically see in terms of rainfall for the month of March. Followed it up with a steady increase in an above average April, May, and especially month of June, before a very dry month of July, and then the wettest month all year. That was back in August, where we were 6 inches above where we should have been for rainfall in the month of August. I think we got somewhere around 10 to 11 inches of rain in that 8th month of the year. But then, as much as we were above average, in fact about 7 inches above where we should have been for the entire year at the end of August, we followed it up with a very dry end of the year. September, October, November, and December all hovering at least or around at least 1 inch below what the rainfall is for those months typically. So all in all, it put us just over 1.5 inches below where we normally see in terms of a year-to-date rainfall. We're going to see if 2026 could at least get off to an above average start, but right now that has still put us in some form of drought conditions that are going to linger very likely until we get a very substantial rainmaker. Now, this week's drought monitor update will take into account this past weekend's rain. We can keep our fingers crossed for maybe some improvement, especially in our northernmost counties. They got some of those higher totals, but areas farther over to the west and areas farther down to the south, I don't imagine much improvement. If anyone is to maybe go down into, say, some abnormally dry conditions from the moderate drought that does stand, I think it is just going to be our northernmost counties. So we'll keep an eye out for that update as it does come out on this Thursday, which will be January 8th, I do believe, because New Year's was last Thursday. I believe my math is correct on that. But headlines, back into the 70s this week. So yes, we had a very quick cold spell, it felt like, as we went into a couple days before New Year's and gradually warmed up to at least some pleasant conditions by the time we rolled into 2026. But then it's been a stretch of the 60s to kick off the month so far. We're making the return into the 70s very shortly, before you may even think that those 70s are back in the cards. Spotty light shower chances are really all that's going to be present throughout the work week this week. We'll go over which time frame is looking the best for seeing some of those light drizzle showers in nature, but there are some better rain chances surrounding the beginning of your weekend. I know it's not the most opportune timing because many of you probably looking forward to the weekend after you get through this week, this work week and school week that is just going to drag on since you are getting back in that routine. But the rain chances are looking best as we go into the beginning of your weekend, Friday and into Saturday. We'll go over the long range models, timing with that as we get closer and closer. First things first, here's a walk around the quad where you can actually get a glimpse of some clouds in a select few areas, but this morning it was a story of widespread fog. Some areas had denser fog in nature than others, and you can actually see it's kind of correlating into a pretty gloomy atmosphere now. Take a look at the Georgia National Fairgrounds, where we couldn't even really get a good view of the clock tower just a couple hundred feet away from this west gate. Now it looks like a predominantly cloudy forecast. In downtown Dublin, there was some fog off in the distance. It still looks like a very gloomy image up there. But downtown Macon and Warner Robins, you can actually at least get a glimpse of some of the blue sky, more so up in downtown Macon right now. But you can get an image that a lot of this fog is continuing to lift up and continuing to clear out. So here's a look at your visibility map where the densest fog does remain up to the north of us, north of the I-20 corridor as you make your way close to, say, areas of between Athens and Atlanta, all the way up into northeast Georgia, and some areas of patchy dense fog that are still lingering closer over to Columbus as you get over to the I-85 corridor, and as close to us as down in Sumter County, Sly County, you can see there's some thin fog in nature, but not really doing a good job of limiting your visibility. This map looks a whole lot better than it did, say, just a couple hours ago, where we had widespread dark gray that was in the near vicinity of us. And in fact, engulfing much of central Georgia, rather I should say, but we'll circle back to that fog because it could very well be a factor for the next couple of mornings as well, not just this morning. Temperature-wise, now that we are getting some clearing in the skies, it is resulting in some slightly warmer numbers, still hanging out in the upper 40s up in Monticello, but areas farther down to the south here in central Georgia, good mix of the 50s, low 50s, some mid 50s like 55 in Milledgeville, Gordon, down to Dublin, over to Wrightsville, and 59 looks to be the warmest. I don't think I spot anyone above that 60-degree mark. So already on the cusp of the 60s down in Vidalia, the rest of central Georgia a couple degrees behind it with some patchy areas of some of that light blue color, indicating some temperatures in the 40s just to the north of us. So compared to our neighbors, a little bit warmer than areas like Montgomery, about the same as the temperature in Panama City, 63 in Charleston, 62 in Jacksonville, so a little bit warmer over on those Atlantic coast cities. 57 degrees in Jackson, 67 degrees in Houston, 68 in Laredo, and actually I think 68 is the warmest temperature we do see. I've been used to seeing some 70s on this current temperature map, but it does look like our fair share of cloud cover could at least be slowing the warm up along areas down here in the deep south and the southeast United States. Even a 59 in Orlando, I do imagine they still have some cloud cover lingering down there in central Florida from the rainy skies that they had over the course of this past weekend. If you watched the Buccaneers and Panthers game on Saturday, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a very, very messy forecast. Here's a look at your dew point temperatures. Right there around 50 degrees. So this is getting into the territory where this time of year, dew point temperatures in the 50s are kind of humid for this time of year. Obviously, we can see these fronts come through and drop these dew point temperatures down into maybe the teens or maybe even the single digits if it gets really, really cold. However, your dew point temperatures are fairly similar to what the actual temperatures do read, so there's a little bit of humidity in the forecast. Not a substantial amount by any means, but it could play a role as we go into the near future. And we will have something in the form of a weaker level disturbance that's going to pass through, and it will have a little bit of moisture to work with. So keep that in mind as we talk about future view here in the next couple of slides. But here's a look at your winds and your wind gusts. Kind of variable right now. Some areas have a little bit of a sustained breeze up to 5 to 7, maybe 9 miles per hour, but not too breezy as you venture out and about this afternoon. So we're circling back to yesterday. So yesterday, it was probably the best day of the entire weekend that we did have. 64 degrees for a high temperature, but that was paired up with some predominantly clear skies. A little bit above average for this time of year, but not as much as your morning low temperature of 45 degrees. That's in the neighborhood of around 9 degrees above your average low temperature of 36. Now we look at the record, 78 degrees back in 1950, and your record low temperature 12 degrees back in 1919. We have not seen that substantial of a cool down, I don't think, so far in the winter season. In fact, if we did get a very substantial cool down, it was probably sometime in the late fall months before we officially transitioned into winter. But here's a look at your rain right here, where we didn't record any yesterday, but take a look at that. Your departure of rain. It has a positive in front of it. Yes, it's only 1/100th of an inch, but we are off to a pretty good start in terms of how much rain we've gotten here in the first couple days of January. Typically, on average, we normally see some form of rainmaker to dump at least a little bit of rain in the first couple of days of the month. And then January kind of very similar to December. And remember last month, we had a whole stretch of some dreary days at the beginning of the month. I do anticipate our fair share of rainmakers during the month of January, as opposed to what we saw mainly in September, October, and getting into November. With the absence of tropical systems, we really didn't have much in the way of rain. So that's something we'll keep an eye out for. We should have one of those coming in hopefully just about each and every week, but we could have a dry spell, and we'll talk about why that kind of is occurring so far as we look into your short-term forecast. Sunrise time, 7:37 a.m. Remember, I was talking about January 1st. That's going to be the latest time that the sun does rise as long as we are in standard time. Now, once we switch to daylight saving time once again, that all is going to change. But sunset continuing to get a little bit later, so at least it's getting later and later from the 5:30 hour and creeping back close to the 6 p.m. hour. But the days are going to continue to get longer. Now that we've passed December 21st, that winter solstice, that is the shortest day of the calendar year in terms of hours of daylight. As of January 1st, we creep back above 10 hours of daylight from 9 hours and 59 minutes, which was the shortest day on December 21st. But January 1st was an important date because it started out a stretch of nearly a week in time that we will have this 7:37 a.m. sunrise, which once again going to be our latest sunrise that we have during standard time, not during daylight saving time. Because if we go all the way to March 8th, you will see that the sunrise 7:53 a.m. But in reality, if we didn't have that time change, the sunrise would be around 6:53 a.m. because it would be getting earlier and earlier. That's what's going to happen as we continue to progress into the end of the winter season and into the beginning of spring. Your sunrise going to get earlier and earlier. Your sunset going to get later and later. Obviously, that time change is going to shift things a little bit. However, we are looking at the time length of daylight to get longer and longer as we progress really over the next 2 months. By the time we're in the beginning of March, take a look at that. 11 hours and 43 minutes of daylight compared to the just over 10 hours of daylight that we are seeing right now. So throughout the month of January, you are going to notice a pretty substantial change. In fact, between the 1st and the 25th, which I also have highlighted because that's going to be the first date that our sunset does return to the 6 p.m. hour, we're actually going to gain about 25 minutes of daylight. So it is going to be more noticeable kind of less you pay attention to it. It's something that if you pay attention to it each and every day, you're obviously not going to notice much difference whatsoever. But by the time we get into the end of January, we're getting ready to roll into February, the Super Bowl, Valentine's Day, you're going to say, hey, look at that. The sun is actually beginning to set a little bit later. But the biggest change will come on March 8th when we spring forward. So that is going to mean that you're going to lose an hour of sleep. but the sunset is going to be at a much more appropriate time at 7:37 p.m. The sun should definitely set sometime around then, between 7 and 8 o'clock. It should not be well before the 6 p.m. hour. It just gives you kind of that gloomy feeling when the sun goes away pretty early into the evening. But now let's get into what's occurring for the rest of today and what's occurring in the rest of your short-term forecast. 67 degrees for a high temperature today. 59 is your average high. And now that we have transitioned out of this morning full of patchy dense fog, partly cloudy and warm, and maybe a bit of a southerly breeze at times, but the winds, like I mentioned, not going to be much of a factor today. Your meteogram continues to hint at the fact that your hour-by-hour warm-up is relatively slow, only peaking at around 62 degrees. So obviously that's a good deal off my high temperature. Still going off this guidance that we have been overshooting the models by just a little bit each and every day. And your high temperature today is also kind of dependent on the cloud coverage. So right now we are keeping that cloud coverage in the forecast. It remains to be seen how many peaks of sunshine that we will get throughout the rest of today. But the more sunshine that you have throughout this afternoon time frame, that's going to lead into a warmer high temperature for the rest of today. So circling back to this graphic, which I showed a lot for the month of December, this is for the month of January now. So each of the first 4 days of the month has all been above average. 64 degrees for a high temperature. In fact, 3 out of the last 4 days that we've had at the beginning of January. So 64 is a very popular number as we kickstart 2026. And even that high temperature of 60 on Saturday, just 1 degree above average of 59 degrees for this time of year. But we obviously haven't seen any below average days, kind of continuing with the trend that we had at the end of December, where we actually got a good stretch and eventually a tally of 15 days above average for your high temperature at the back half of December. But here's a look at your satellite and radar, which is indicating more clearing over to the east in terms of maybe some of that surface level cloud cover not in the forecast anymore. And I do anticipate some scattered clouds throughout today, but I don't anticipate a predominantly overcast and just a sheet of cloud cover that's blocking every little bit of sunshine. You're going to have on and off cloud cover throughout today, and that's going to be the case across many areas of not only central Georgia, but the entire state of Georgia. So here's a look as we progress into this afternoon, more so the evening hours around 5 p.m. Like I said, on and off cloud cover. They are scattered all across the area. You'll see some occasional sunshine. You'll see some occasional gloominess from the overcast skies, but it's not going to be present one way or the other for the entirety of the rest of today. Walking out the door to what looks like some mostly cloudy skies tomorrow morning. Then as we progress into the afternoon, you see some clearing in that cloud cover, but the big thing I want to turn your attention to is you can see these wind arrows starting to come out of the south and the southwest. Tomorrow is looking to be a bit of a breezy afternoon. We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. But here is that one rain chance I was alluding to a little bit earlier. Starting in the late night hours on Tuesday. So this is around 10 p.m. Only looking like some scattered light showers in nature. But this is actually going to come courtesy of an upper level disturbance. Basically think of this as a frontal boundary just in the higher levels of the atmosphere. When a frontal boundary is more so at the surface, it's going to have a lot more to work with, and it's going to have a much more profound axis of rain ahead of it. But this doesn't have as much to work with, but just a little bit of humidity. Like I mentioned, that is already in our forecast, and with that southwesterly breeze, that's going to continue to usher in some more moisture content into our forecast. Just enough for a couple spotty showers during mainly the overnight time frame from Tuesday into very early morning on Wednesday. And then very likely by the time you're making your way out the door, most of this rain is out of the picture. May hang around in our southern counties for just a little bit longer, but Wednesday afternoon looking mostly sunny. Could have a few high level clouds in the forecast, but I actually anticipate Wednesday afternoon to be the warmest of the next 3. Not only because our warming trend will will go out farther and farther into the future. However, all you're seeing is really some high-level clouds, not doing the best job of blocking some of that sunshine. So here's a look at your forecast with the numbers over the next 3 days. 67 for a high temperature like we mentioned today. Maybe overshooting it in some areas, but it may be spot on in some areas that are already warming up in light of their mostly sunny skies. 71 for a high temperature tomorrow afternoon. So we're back in the 70s already, even despite the on and off clouds that we will see throughout the day on Tuesday. 10% chance of rain, just one of those light showers, mainly for the nighttime hours Tuesday and extending into the morning hours, really more so the early morning hours on Wednesday. And then a high temperature of 75 degrees, and your morning low temperatures They also steadily increase day by day. 45 to walk out the door tomorrow, a little bit warmer than today, and 53 degrees as we walk out the door on Wednesday because the cloud cover going to be a bit denser overnight Tuesday into early morning on Wednesday, and that cloud cover is your best friend if you're hoping for some more pleasant numbers to walk out the door to each and every day. So here's a look at your future view fog graphic. This is not set in stone, so obviously don't pinpoint exactly where you do see the darkest gray color, but know that all of central Georgia once again has the potential to see some widespread dense fog or just some patchy dense fog as we go into the morning hours tomorrow. And that will be something that you'll want to set the alarm for maybe about 15 minutes earlier and wake up. Just budget for a little bit more time as you make your way outside. Not only Tuesday, but also Wednesday. I know, like I said, this week is going to drag. It's already dragging a little bit for me, myself. But I promise you, these extra couple of minutes as you make your way out on the roads each and every morning will make it worth your while, especially if you're one of those that starts to cut it really, really close with making it to work on time each and every day. And then as we go into Thursday morning, maybe a few areas of some fog, but not looking as likely because this happens. So we start to get that south and southwesterly breeze over the course of Tuesday afternoon. That's going to help propel more moisture into our forecast. Like I said, not overly humid, but definitely enough to work with to bring us a couple of spotty light showers as we go overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. And then that upper level boundary does start to maybe usher in some slightly drier air. It at least gets that color in terms of the light green farther down to the south of us, but our dew point temperature is still going to be maybe noticeably humid. But I do anticipate that is going to be a big reason for maybe at least getting the fog out of the picture for one morning on Thursday morning. Not a very substantial drop in the humidity levels. However, we will talk about the breeze because that could be a bit substantial. I think for really just a short time period tomorrow, just after lunchtime, you should expect those winds to get a bit of an uptick. Some gusts up to 22, maybe even 25 miles per hour. And then we still have a steady breeze as we go into the nighttime hours on Tuesday, but definitely nothing as gusty as what we will see immediately after lunchtime tomorrow. So that's going to be the time frame if you're venturing outside. Going to have a bit of a bad hair day, maybe something in the form of a ball cap day. I would say wear the beanie, but it's obviously going to be well too warm for wearing any of those winter clothes that you would normally wear. And it's going to extend that warm stretch of weather all the way through the rest of the work week. So 67 degrees for a high temperature today. We make the rebound into the 70s starting tomorrow. And then we're nestled in the mid 70s. Very thankfully, this is as high as we go. Mid 70s, 75, 74 degrees for Wednesday, Thursday into Friday. But all of these numbers are a good deal above your average high of 59 degrees. So getting in the neighborhood at the peak of this, around 16 degrees above average for this time of year. And speaking of above average, your morning low temperatures, they are going to bounce around between the 40s and the 50s. Those areas or those days, that you do see morning low temperatures of the low 50s, 53 degrees. That's going to be when we have more cloud cover present. So I am anticipating more cloud coverage Tuesday night into Wednesday morning and also Thursday night into Friday morning as of right now. A little bit cooler on those nights where you do have some relatively clear skies and it allows the numbers to drop down more, but nowhere near your average low of 36 degrees. Never thought I'd be showing you a muggy meter during the month of January, but here we are because we are going to have decent and noticeable humidity in the forecast each of the next couple of days, expecting maybe the peak of the moisture content in the atmosphere. Again, not going to be overly humid. We're not looking at some summertime humidity with dew point temperatures in the 70s. They're going to be somewhere between the 50s, maybe even into the 60s in a select few spots. But Thursday, Friday into Saturday maybe, that's when we are expecting more moisture to be in the forecast. Keep that in mind as we talk about our next rainmaker that does look to arrive as we head towards the weekend, but you can get the indication that there is a big time frontal boundary coming through, indicated by that big drop in humidity from Saturday all the way into Sunday, where the dew point temperatures drop completely off the graphic. So here's a look at your long range models where it does look like just on and off cloud cover, maybe a few light showers that could be scattered about in a select few spots. Overall, mostly dry forecast still for both Thursday and into Friday. If Future View seems to think that we'll see some pretty decent coverage of some light showers, I might have liked to throw a 10% chance of rain on your 7-day, but overall, I do think the best window is still going to be Tuesday night into early on Wednesday morning because there will be a driving force behind those rain chances, not just kind of operating off whatever moisture is available and kind of pop up light showers. We typically talk about the nature of pop-up showers and storms during the summertime months. It's very similar in nature, but we just don't quite have the warm temperatures and we don't quite have the super swampy humidity to work with that we would during the summertime. So it's that on a much more less enhanced scale, but nonetheless, we go into Friday night, 8 p.m. Yes, there's no rain chances here in central Georgia. I still think your Friday night plans are looking good to go, but I do have a rain chance surrounding Friday just to cover the bases because we could see some fluctuation in the timing of this. Obviously, you see the models in very good agreement about widespread rain, even some storms, and I have even seen a severe weather risk in areas back over to the west of us as you go into Friday. Well, that same frontal boundary looks to creep in to our neck of the woods as we go into Saturday. So it could be really early in the morning on Saturday. I'm not anticipating much coverage of anything in the way of severe weather during that morning time frame on Saturday. But if this boundary does trail a little bit later and say tries to pass through when we go during that afternoon time frame where our temperatures are going to be at their warmest, we have some humidity in the forecast, it could create some better coverage of rain than these long-range models are showing as of right now. I definitely do anticipate some better coverage of rain after looking at a lot of different models as of this morning and just kind of using the general consensus. There is more moisture in the forecast. There are going to be some relatively warm temperatures well above average for this time of year. It's all going to be dependent on what time that frontal boundary passes through. That is going to fine-tune our rain chances and the coverage of rain and even how intense that rainfall is as we go into the beginning of the weekend. But one thing is for certain, that front passes through and it clears conditions out as we go into the beginning of next week. And it is also going to finally usher in some cooler air into your forecast. So your future view rainfall graphics, obviously not the best resolution, but it gives us a general idea. This isn't hinting at much in the way of heavy rainfall by any means, according to the GFS model, but there is plenty of rainfall and some higher totals up to the north and the northwest of us, right on the cusp of central Georgia. The European has a bit of better resolution. However, we're still not seeing totals even above a couple tenths of an inch of rain. So there definitely needs to be some more fine tuning done with the models, but I think it's all going to be dependent on what time of day that frontal boundary comes through as we go into Saturday. But it could trail a little bit earlier. So Friday into Saturday, those are the 2 days that you need to be on the lookout for, especially if you have any plans. As of right now, the models are trending more so towards a Saturday morning arrival, maybe lingering a little bit into the afternoon as opposed to Friday, but still keeping rain chances on both just to cover any fluctuation or wiggle room that we could see with the timing. Other than that, next best chance at some showers going to be Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Just a couple of spotty sprinkles during the overnight time frame. Very likely that you wake up the next morning, you see some of the wet ground, the wet driveway that you do have, but you didn't notice it whatsoever as you were fast asleep. Best case scenario, it's just giving you a little bit of white noise with a pitter patter on your window. And then as we go into the end of the work week, that's going to be the peak of the warm up, somewhere in the mid 70s. Wouldn't even be surprised to see a couple of these get increased to maybe even the upper 70s because, I mean, we hit 81 degrees for Christmas Eve. I feel like anything's possible now after that. 70 degrees for a high temperature on Saturday. That is going to be the day that probably fluctuates the most in terms of your high temperature. It's going to be strongly influenced by what time the passage of that frontal boundary makes its way through. If the front passes through a little bit earlier into the morning hours, I wouldn't anticipate as much in the coverage of rain, not as much in the way of intensity of rain, and I would expect some cooler numbers because the front will have passed through before that peak heating window into the afternoon. So it would result in maybe some cooler high temperatures, and I would anticipate Sunday's high temperature to go down if that were the case. But if the front comes in a little bit later, I imagine your high temperature will be pretty similar to what we have forecasted on Friday, but maybe just a little bit lower because we'll see an increase in clouds ahead of the frontal boundary itself. Now looking ahead, so we do have a whole new slate of holidays to look for and just notable events. MLK Day, if you're already searching for that next 3-day weekend, it is only 2 weeks away. So that is going to be your next holiday and maybe day off of work and school for many of you. Or maybe you're going to take that holiday a little bit later. You're going to work actual MLK Day and maybe take it for a trip that you have planned, say, for the Super Bowl, which is only in about 34 days. That's going to be over in Santa Clara, California, the 49ers Stadium. If any of you have plans to go, then I wish you safe travels for that, but that's obviously going to be a big day for many, and many of you might want to even take that Monday off, as a lot of people have had some debate about if that should be a national holiday or not. Then Valentine's Day, 6 days later, Valentine's Day, that Saturday after the Super Bowl, and then you'll get another 3-day weekend very likely, especially government employees for President's Day, which is in 42 days. So a lot to look ahead at, but I've run out of time here. Hopefully that covered everything you need to know with your extended forecast. We'll see you back at 11 a.m. tomorrow for more.